Dr. David Van Ghent, tell me about the research about the outcomes for children in homosexual families as opposed to heterosexual families. The concern we're saying is there's an injustice to deprive a child deliberately by legislation of one of or both of his or her biological parents and depriving them of that natural kinship. What is the difference in outcome? I know we won't be detracting from the parenting abilities or the capacity for love of any individual, but what's missing and what does the evidence say? Because what we hear the media saying is that there's no difference, and plenty of studies and science support the no difference.
Okay. Dave, it comes again back to biology. We are mammals. We are built into a structure where we have a mother and a father input into our life. Now, this is the simple fact to start with, that we know, as certainly as we know any fact in social science, that a child does best on average when raised by biological married parents. Now that has been established beyond doubt over some 50 years of rigorous research. We just know that the optimal structure on average for children is to be raised by their biological married parents. You've got to start from that point because that is solid ground. Now it follows that any new structure that breaks the biological bonds of a child with his mother or his father is going to fall short of that ideal. It's going to be detrimental. It's going to harm children. Yeah, but you see, that's any structure. And we've got to be tough with ourselves. That means single parenting, where there's no father or mother. It means divorced and remarried families.
Blended families.
Yeah, because the biological bond is broken. And it could have been for the most innocent and beautiful reasons, tragic reasons, and so on. That's beside the point. If you break the biological bonds of a child with her mum or her dad, you will, on average, harm children. Simple as that.
That seems like common sense.
Well, it is common sense because we're mammals and because the relationship is so profound and the biological relationship is especially passionate and profound. There are whole books, there are whole libraries written on the reason why children do best with their own biological mum and dad. Now, of course, same-sex marriage, this new thing in town, is just another way of breaking the biological bond. And therefore, it is expected to cause the same harm or disadvantage to children. And guess what? That is exactly what we find.
So what about all these studies that say it doesn't, that there's no outcome?
Careful. What they're claiming is that there's no difference in outcomes for children of same-sex households compared to children of opposite-sex households. That is true if you're comparing it to opposite-sex broken households, broken family structures, I should say, because they all suffer the same disadvantage of a broken biological bond.
So you're saying they're not comparing it to married biological parents?
They're very careful not to compare it to married biological parents. In fact, there's a rule in the American Psychological Association that you're not allowed to, so to speak, compare it to married biological parents. You have to compare it to the entire pool of all family structures. So it's a little bit suspicious why they've done that, as in the 80s.
So it's a polluted comparison.
Yeah. Now, when you compare it to the gold standard, married biological parents, of course, same-sex parenting is detrimental, disadvantageous, in some ways harmful to children. If you want to do studies into the effects of same-sex marriage on children, and you want to compare it to other biologically disrupted structures, or you want to compare it to marriage, whatever, the important thing is to have the gold standard research. And all of those little studies you mentioned that say, children do really well in same-sex households. Well, with one exception and possibly a second exception, all those 50 or 60 or 70 studies are essentially worthless because they fail the academic standards of unbiased sample, sufficient size to be statistically valid and not just a chance finding, and representative of the whole population, not some subgroup.
Yeah.
If you want valid science, you can only rely on studies that are large, representative, and random or non-biased in their sample. Now, as of the time I wrote the book and published it in September last year, there were 10 such studies in the entire literature. It is a very expensive and difficult task.
I bet.
And so in my chapter 4, called Social Science Speaks Out, I'll guide you through those 10 studies. And of them, the vast majority find quite significant disadvantage or harm when you do the right comparison, children of same-sex households and children of married biological homes. And also, Dave, this is interesting, they uncover further harm and disadvantage even when you compare that broken family structure to other heterosexual broken family structures. So let me read you a summary sentence from 3 of the professors involved, Sullins, Regnerus, and another one, Lauren Marks. And they concluded thus, they said, the longer social scientists study the question of same-sex parenting, the more evidence of harm is found. And the fact that children with same-sex parents suffer significant harm in that condition compared to children with opposite-sex parents has been established beyond reasonable doubt. Despite intense political bias, they actually reference this, to suppress the findings set forth herein, evidence from large, nationally representative studies has demonstrated that children raised by same-sex parents do not fare as well as those with opposite-sex parents, and many experience substantial harm. And as I comment at the very close of that chapter, Dave, which of our politicians is so negligent, so captive to fashion, and so indifferent to the best interests of the child as to sign this new institution into law when we know that it is going to harm children?
I think that's an important distinction to make, because we know that a disrupted family structure is bad for kids.
On average.
Ideal.
On average. You'll always get broken families that are better for kids than intact bad marriages, but on average, it's worse.
Leaving the minutiae and the exceptions aside, what we're not saying is that single mothers and single fathers are bad parents. We're not saying that homosexuals are bad parents. We're not saying that somebody whose husband or wife got divorced or passed away or even abandoned them are bad parents. What we're saying is nobody would go into a family environment planning on depriving their children of their father or their mother. Nobody goes into marriage and has kids planning on getting divorced or planning on their spouse dying or doing anything like that. But to create a family structure by law where it's likely that a child will be deliberately deprived of their biological mother or father.
Not likely, definite.
Inevitable. Yeah. That's the unconscionable part.
Yeah, really important to restate that. I mean, I'm a GP. I've got lots of single-parent patients. I think they do a generally astonishing job because I observe it, and I think I probably couldn't do that. But I've never met a single parent
it's admirable.
who wanted their child to miss out on the other parent. I've never met anyone who wanted the child to miss out. Things just happened, and now they make the best of their situation. If we institute the marriage of 2 men, we are instituting motherless families as an ideal, not as a tragedy, as an ideal. And we are saying future children don't need a mother, and we're writing laws to make sure that those future children will not have a mother. And David, I think, will we never learn? Will we never stop finding new ways of harming children? Because it was only in 2013 that we had then Prime Minister Julia Gillard give that magnificent national apology for forced adoption of babies away from their teenage mothers. And she said in a beautiful speech in Parliament, "We broke the most primal and sacred bond that there is, the bond between a mother and her baby," end quote, her finest moment. Now look, 4 years later, we are being asked to approve another government policy that will break that primal and sacred bond all over again and hurt a whole new cohort of children who will be deprived of their mother or their father.
Ignoring that fact is at best willful ignorance, if not at worst malicious.
And that's why, as you said in the start, it's a choice between adult-centred emotional satisfaction or the profound emotional needs and rights of children. In fact, the opening quote in my book is from our wonderful professor at Notre Dame in Sydney, Professor Margaret Somerville, and she put it this way. She said, "Same-sex marriage forces us to choose between giving priority to children's rights or to homosexual adult claims." Perfect. That is the choice that will be before us if we ever stand in that plebiscite booth, which we may still. If we ever stand there, we are choosing between priority to children's rights, their deep needs, that primal sacred bond with their mother and their father, or are we going to abolish that in law for the sake of that 1% of couples who are same-sex attracted? Now, my hope, Dave, is that Australians, when faced with that, will say two things. They will say, hey, same-sex couples, that 1% of couples, according to the Bureau of Statistics, already have 100% exactly the same rights and status as any other couples in Australia. They do. There's no difference.
That's right.
Tanya Plibersek admitted that 2 years ago. She said there is no longer any law that discriminates against gays, lesbians, same-sex couples.
Because we deliberately went out of
we went out and did it in 2008.
Them.
So there is no discrimination in Australia.
That's right.
So we don't need to overturn the foundation of society to sort of, as a form of sort of affirmation therapy for gay couples. They don't need it. They've got the same rights already. And I hope that they will say what matters with marriage is giving every child their chance of a mum and a dad. That's why we have it. That's why we try to keep men with their mates. That's what marriage is. We are not going to throw that out and abandon future children to a motherless life or a fatherless life, just to affirm our niceness as, you know, nice people who want everyone to be happy. That's so trivial, so stupid.
When we come back, let's talk about something you've just touched on briefly now, and that is homosexual mental health, bullying of gay kids, suicide rates of gay youth, and other health outcomes that are expected or predicted by homosexual lobbyists to be remedied or improved by redefining marriage in law. All that in the next segment.